Okay, we're on page 368, chapter 12, Presidency. We're still under national security. So I've already read for national security. He's the chief diplomat, commander-in-chief, the War Powers Resolution, and how that's really a no-go. People like to remember that, but it's arguably meaningless. The president's just gonna ignore it. So now we're under crisis manager with national security. The president's role as chief diplomat and commander-in-chief are related to another presidential responsibility, crisis management. A crisis is a sudden, unpredictable, and potentially dangerous event. Most crises occur in the realm of foreign policy. They often involve hot tempers and high risks. Quick judgments must be made on the basis of sketchy information, be it American hostages held in Iran for Carter or the discovery of Soviet missiles in Cuba for Kennedy. A crisis challenges the president to make difficult decisions. Crises are rarely the president's doing, but handled incorrectly, they can be the president's undoing. On the other hand, handling a crisis well can remake a president's image, as George W. found following the terrorist attacks of September 11th. Early in American history, there were fewer immediate crises. They had a lot of daily crises of like different types of issues. But by the time officials were aware of a problem, it often had resolved itself. Communications could take weeks or even months to reach Washington. Similarly, officials' decisions often took weeks or months to reach those who were to implement them. The most famous land battle of the War of 1812, the Battle of New Orleans, was fought after the U.S. had signed a peace treaty with Great Britain. Word of the treaty did not reach the battlefield. Thus, General Andrew Jackson won a victory for the U.S. that contributed nothing toward ending the war, although it did help put him in the White House as the 7th president. With modern communications, the president can instantly monitor events almost anywhere. Moreover, because situations develop rapidly today, there is a premium on rapid action, secrecy, constant management, consistent judgment, and expert advice. Congress usually moves slowly. One might say deliberately, like in a good way. And it is large, making secrecy difficult. Decentralized, requiring continual compromising, and composed of generalists. So they're not experts in anything specific. As a result, the president, who can come to quick and consistent decisions, confine information to a small group, carefully oversee developments, and call on experts in the executive branch, has become more prominent in handling crisis. As America moves through its third century under the Constitution, presidents might wish the framers had been less concerned with checks and balances in the areas of national security. In recent years, Congress has challenged presidents on all fronts, including intelligence operations, the treatment of prisoners of war, foreign aid, arms sales, the development, procurement, and deployment of weapons systems, the negotiation and interpretation of treaties, the selection of diplomats, and the continuation of nuclear testing. Congress has a central constitutional role in making national security policy, although this role is often misunderstood. The allocation of responsibilities for such matters is based on the founders' apprehensions about the concentration of power and the potential for its abuse. Think back to when there were kings and they would all send people to war in order to take territory on the discretion of the king. They don't want that again. They divided the powers of supply and command, for example, in order to thwart adventurism in national security affairs. I don't know what that means. Don't know what that means. Congress can thus refuse to provide the necessary authorizations and appropriations for presidential actions. I guess that's the supply, that's the budgeting, whereas the chief executive can refuse to act. So they ask him to send troops, go to war, and he says, no, I'm not going to do it. Okay, so there's your separation there. There's your supply and, what is the other word? Command. Supply is the money, command is the commander-in-chief. Despite the constitutional role of Congress, the president is the driving force behind national security policy, providing energy and direction. Congress is well organized to deliberate openly on the discrete components of policy, but is not well designed to take the lead on national security matters. Its role has typically been overseeing the executive rather than initiating policy. Congress frequently originates proposals for domestic policy, but is less involved in national security policy. And again, that really comes back to post-World War II, Truman administration, a respect that the president, from Congress, a respect that the president will do the right thing, that the president and his team are deliberate and responsible, and we will give him the authority to do what he needs to do because we know he can do right. Now, of course, Vietnam kind of throws a wrench in that, but Congress authorized that too. The president has a more prominent role in foreign affairs as the country's sole representative in dealing with other nations and as commander-in-chief of the armed forces, functions that effectively preclude a wide range of congressional, diplomatic, and military initiatives. So keep them from doing it. In addition, the nature of national security issues may make the failure to integrate the elements of policy more costly than in domestic policy. It might be military or war. Thus, members of Congress typically prefer to encourage, criticize, or support the president rather than initiate their own national security policies. If leadership occurs, it is usually centered in the White House. So I tend to talk negatively of Congress, but there is a practical reason, again, why Congress gave its authority for foreign affairs, in particular, to the president. Although Congress is typically reactive on national security policy, it can constrain the president, even on the initiation, scope, and duration of military actions. Members can introduce legislation to curtail the use of force, hold oversight hearings, and engage in debate over military policymaking in the public sphere. Such debate influences public opinion and thus raises the cost of military action for the president. Commentators on the presidency often refer to the two presidencies. By the way, this is a test question that people get wrong. Pay attention. One for domestic, which is at home, U.S. territory, and the other for national security, so our foreign policy. By this phrase, they mean that the president has more success in leading Congress on matters of national security than on matters of domestic policy. The typical member of Congress, however, supports the president on roll call votes about national security only slightly more than half the time. There's a significant gap between what the president requests and what members of Congress are willing to give. Certainly, the legislature does not give the president automatic support on national security policy. Nevertheless, presidents do end up obtaining much, often most, of what they request from Congress on national security issues. Some of the support they receive is the result of agreement on policy. Other support comes from the president's ability to act first. This is a good one, placing Congress in a reactive position and opening it to charge that is undermining U.S. foreign policy if it challenges the president's initiative. And I brought that up before. Don't ask permission, do it, and then and then let it fall where it falls. And that's where presidents are learning to best act when it comes to foreign policy. It doesn't matter what Congress says, just do it and then deal with the outcome. Presidents need resources to influence others to support their policies. One important presidential asset can be the support of the American people. The following sections will take a closer look at how the White House tries to increase and use public support. Okay. Public sentiment is, quote, public sentiment is everything. With public sentiment, nothing can fail. Without it, nothing can succeed. These words spoken by Lincoln pose what is perhaps the greatest challenge to any president: to obtain and maintain the public's support. Because presidents are rarely in a position to command others to comply with their wishes, they must rely on persuasion. Public support is perhaps the greatest source of influence a president has, for it is more difficult for other power holders in a democracy to deny the legitimate demands of a president with popular backing. So if you have popular support, which arguably means the system's working, right? The president gets support. Americans are reasonable human beings. They support him because it's good policy. Therefore, we have a good functioning republic. Yeah. You could do research on that one. Presidents are not passive followers of public opinion. They actively try to shape it. Told you in a previous one, as I'm reading this, Biden's going to go out and he's going to campaign the win of that COVID law. And he's going to say, look at this money that's going to these programs. This is because of it. He's working his public opinion. The White House is a virtual whirlwind of public relations activity, beginning with Kennedy, the first television president. Presidents, with the notable exception of Nixon, have been active in making public presentations. Indeed, they have averaged more than one appearance every weekday of the year in their attempts to obtain the public support for themselves and their policies. Often, the White House stages the president's appearances purely to get the public's attention. George W. chose to announce the end of major combat in Iraq on board the aircraft, the Abraham Lincoln. The White House's Office of Communications choreographed every aspect of the event, including positioning the aircraft carrier so the shoreline could not be seen by the camera when the president landed, arraying members of the crew in coordinated shirt colors over Bush's right shoulder, placing a banner reading "Mission Accomplished," which, of course, was really backfired to have that mission accomplished put there. If you know, we're still in Iraq. To perfectly capture the president in the celebratory 2 words in a single camera shot, and timing the speech so the sun cast a golden glow on the president. In such a case, the president could have simply made an announcement, but the need for public support drives the White House to employ public relations techniques similar to those used to publicize commercial products. In many democracies, different people occupy the jobs of head of states and head of government. For example, the Queen is the head of state in England, but she holds little power in government and politics. She's the one, though, that holds the diplomatic dinners. And when the president of the U.S. comes to England, it's considered beneficial that he meets with the Queen. In America, these roles are fused. They're joined together. As head of state, the president is America's ceremonial leader and symbol of government. Trivial but time-consuming activities, tossing out the first baseball of the season, lighting the White House Christmas tree, meeting an extraordinary boy or Girl Scout. I think of the Easter egg roll, or the pardoning of the Thanksgiving turkey, are part of the ceremonial function of the presidency. So why does he do it? It's about publicity. It's about this is just what you do as head of state. Meeting foreign heads of state, receiving ambassadors' credentials, and making global goodwill tours represent the international side of this role. Presidents rarely shirk these duties, even when they are not inherently important. Ceremonial activities give them an important symbolic aura and a great deal of favorable press coverage, contributing to their efforts to build public support. Okay, presidential approval. The White House aims much of the energy it devotes to public relations at increasing the president's public approval. It believes that the higher the president stands in the polls, the easier it is to persuade others to support presidential initiatives. Because of the connection between public support and presidential influence, the press, members of Congress, and others in the Washington political community closely monitor the president's standing in the polls. Do you approve or disapprove? As I said with Trump in the previous one, and I'm going to be curious to see what happens with Biden, Trump accepted and knew his base was his base. And so they weren't going to watch the approval polls as much as previous presidents. They were going to run with their supporters and just try to solidify approval from them. I don't know if Biden will go the same route. He's trying to get, not necessarily because he didn't think Obama did it as well as he should have. I've read that. So that's why he's doing the tour to promote this COVID law, COVID money. We'll see. Presidents frequently do not have widespread public support, often failing to win even majority approval. For Presidents Nixon, Ford, Carter, Bush, Obama, this average approval level was under 50%. And for Ronald Reagan, it was only 52%. So if you remember, Reagan won in a landslide, but his approval wasn't that high. Although George H.W. Bush enjoyed much higher average approval levels for 3 years, in his 4th year, his ratings dropped below 40%. Bill Clinton struggled to rise above the 50% mark in his first term. Keep in mind, when you have disapproval, it's not so much with Trump, but with Obama and some of these others, it's also the people who want more from you. With Obama, there were liberals that were disapproved of him because they thought he was acting too much of a moderate. So don't assume disapproval means you won't vote for the person, for any of these presidents. Just because you disapprove doesn't mean you like the other guy better. Presidential approval is the product of many factors. Political party identification provides the basic underpinning of approval or disapproval and mediates the impact of other factors. Partisans are not inclined to approve presidents of the other party. Historically, those who identify with the president's party give the president approval more than 40 percentage points higher than do those who identify with the opposition party. In the more polarized times under George W. and Obama, this difference rose to more than 70 percentage points. So they're all just going for the independents, which aren't that many. Presidents usually benefit from a honeymoon, this was talked about already, with the American people after taking office. Some observers believe that this honeymoon is a fleeting phenomenon, with the public affording new occupants of the White House only a short grace period before they begin their inevitable descent in the polls. You can see in the figure 12.3 that declines do take place, but they are neither inevitable nor swift. Throughout his 2 terms in office, Reagan experienced considerable volatility, ups and downs, in his relations with the public. But his record certainly showed that support can be revived. Clinton enjoyed more approval in his second term than in his first. Economy was doing really well then. Changes in approval levels appear to reflect the public's evaluation of how the president is handling policy areas such as the economy, war, and foreign affairs. Different policies are salient to the public at different times, or speak to them at different times. For example, if international acts of terrorism on American interests are increasing, then foreign policy is likely to dominate the news and to be on the minds of Americans. If the economy turns sour, then people are going to be concerned about unemployment. Contrary to conventional wisdom, citizens seem to focus on the president's efforts and stands on issues rather than on personality or popularity, or simply how presidential policies affect them. Job-related personal characteristics of the president, such as integrity and leadership skills, also play an important role in influencing presidential approval. And I know this is controversial to say, but a lot of the disapproval of Trump, of some who would normally approve of him, and I'm thinking suburban white women, is the integrity issue. They didn't see him as having integrity, and that affected him. And so you might be thinking, it doesn't matter, but it did. It did matter to many. And Obama was well liked. He was not. Nobody really questioned his integrity. No one questioned his ethics. But that doesn't mean they didn't question what his policy. They did not like him being a Democrat. They didn't like Obamacare. That would be the big one. They didn't like his policies, but they liked him. He was considered likable. Sometimes public approval of the president takes sudden jumps. One popular explanation for these surges of efforts is rally events. That's a test question. If I can say the AL right, I'm really bad at that. Rally events. Test question, which John Miller defined as events that are related to international relations, directly involve the U.S. and particularly the president, and are specific, dramatic, and sharply focused. A classic example is the 18 percentage point rise in George H.W. Bush's approval rating immediately after the Gulf War in 91. George W.'s approval shot up 39 percentage points in September 2001. Such occurrences are unusual and isolated events, however. They usually have little enduring impact on the president's public approval. George H.W. Bush, for example, dropped precipitously in the polls and lost his bid for re-election in 92. We were starting a recession in 92, or in a recession. That didn't help. It's a rallying around the flag is another phrase you'll hear out in the public, rallying around the flag. Oh, America, the patriotism idea that something happens to us or we go to war. We all have this defining moment of patriotism. There was an event with Trump, but it didn't pan out that way. I don't remember what it was though. Anyway, the criteria on which the public evaluates presidents, such as the way they are handling the economy, where they stand on complex issues, and whether they are strong leaders, are open to many interpretations. Different people see things differently. That's a profound statement. The modern White House makes extraordinary efforts to control the context in which presidents appear in public and the way they are portrayed by the press in order to try to influence how the public views them. The fact that presidents are frequently low in the polls anyway is persuasive testimony to the limits of presidential leadership of the public. As one statement of the public presidency put it, the supply of popular support rests on opinion dynamics over which the president may exert little direct control. So to use Trump again, that he liked his rallies, he liked how he operated in his rallies, and his supporters really enjoyed them. So when you look at this, like trying to control the image, what he really liked and what his supporters really liked was also what his detractors, the people who did not support him, really disliked. So do you do your public events the way your supporters want them, or do you go a different direction to try to get more supporters? And that, and would that even work anyway? Commentators on the presidency can often refer to it as a bully pulpit. Note that word too, or phrase, implying that presidents can persuade or even mobilize the public to support their policies if they are skilled communicators. I think Mitch McConnell just used this phrase with Biden like 2 days ago. Your role is just the bully pulpit. Certainly, presidents frequently do attempt to obtain public support for their policies with television or radio appearances and speeches to large groups. All presidents since Truman have had media advice from experts on lighting, makeup, stage settings, camera angles, clothing, pacing of delivery, and other facets of making speeches. Despite this aid and despite politicians' speaking experience, presidential speeches designed to lead public opinion have typically been rather unimpressive. So Donald Trump could easily argue, if I try to do it based on all of this, on what you're saying, the lighting, the pacing of delivery, it's not going to work anyway. I might as well give my supporters what they want. In the modern era, experts consider only FDR, Kennedy, Reagan, Clinton, and Obama to have been especially effective speakers. This was written before Trump was president. I don't know what they would say about him. Moreover, the public is not always receptive to the president's message. For the most part, Americans are not especially interested in politics and government. Thus, it is not easy to get their attention. Citizens also have predispositions about public policy. And this is a quote like directly out of my mind, however ill-informed, that filter presidential messages. When people encounter political information, they must balance two conflicting roles: as updaters who want to perceive the world objectively, and as motivated reasoners who distort information to make it consistent with their political preferences. So let me read that again. When people encounter political information, they must balance two conflicting roles. Updaters who want to perceive the world objectively, that's role one, and as motivated reasoners who distort information to make it consistent with their political preferences. This I keep talking about. This was the point I'm trying to bring in class, at least for this year. This idea is, you support it because you support the president versus you support it, therefore you'll support the president. A little different. The more salient people's partisan identities, which are especially heightened during the long presidential campaigns in an era of extreme partisan polarization, also negative partisanship. Negative partisanship means, and I believe I brought it up already, it's not so much you like your party as you hate the other party. The more difficult it is for the president to get his message through. The public may miss the point or even the most colorful rhetoric or get its basic facts wrong, and thus may have difficulty evaluating policies sensibly. In his 2010 State of the Union address, Obama declared that as part of his economic recovery plan, his administration had passed 25 different tax cuts. At about the same time, in a Super Bowl Sunday interview, he touted the tax cuts in the stimulus package. Nevertheless, shortly afterward, 24% of the public responded that the administration had increased taxes, and 53% said it kept taxes the same. By the end of October, 52% of likely voters thought taxes had gone up for the middle class. Because they're getting their news sources. We have different news sources, remember that. Ronald Reagan, sometimes called the great communicator, was certainly interested in policy change and went to unprecedented lengths to influence public opinion on behalf of such policies as deregulation. You should know what that is now. Decreases in spending on domestic policy, you should know that now, and increases in the defense budget. Clinton, also an extraordinarily able communicator, traveled widely and spoke out constantly on behalf of his policies, such as those dealing with the economy, healthcare reform, and free trade. I have been told that Bill Clinton, when he talked to people, made you feel very valuable. He was really personable. I've never met him. I don't know, but that's the talk about Bill Clinton. Reagan probably as well. Very personable people. Nevertheless, both presidents were typically unable to obtain the public support for their initiatives. More recently, George W. made an extraordinary effort to obtain public backing for his stewardship of the war in Iraq and his proposal to reform Social Security. Like his predecessors, he was unsuccessful. Similarly, Barack Obama was not able to rally the public behind his efforts to reform healthcare or for most of the elements of his economic policy. In the absence of national crisis, most people are unreceptive to political appeals. So, make it a crisis. Think about that when you watch the media. Make it a crisis. If it's a crisis, maybe they'll be more receptive. So again, this is going back to that comment about that word bully pulpit, being able to energize, persuade the public. Because you have the media, you have the attention. When you say you're going to talk, people bring cameras if you let them, and you get like media attention. So you can do it. Okay. Sometimes merely changing public opinion is not sufficient. The president wants the public to communicate its views directly to Congress. Mobilization of the public may be the ultimate weapon in the president's arsenal of resources with which to influence Congress. When the people speak, especially when they speak clearly, Congress listens. Call them up. Tell them to support it. However, the president is rarely able to mobilize the public because doing so involves overwhelming, formidable barriers and entails the double burden of obtaining public opinion support and political action from a generally inattentive and apathetic public. In addition, the effort to mobilize the public is a risky strategy. If the president tries to mobilize the public and fails, the lack of response speaks clearly to members of Congress. Does anybody think this sounds like a fun job yet?